our next video here. You're going to notice today that I'm all alone. This is just Mr. Plaza here with you. But today we are going to be talking about an era of time in European history called the Enlightenment. Okay, and a lot of it, as you can see from that cartoon there at the bottom, is related to this idea of critical thinking. Okay, getting people to think for themselves, getting people to question what they see around them. So the topic of our video today is going to be the Enlightenment. Okay, we have three different questions today, and you see them up here on the screen. Our first is, what makes change desirable? And as we move forward throughout second semester, this is a question that we're going to see a lot. What causes people to change their minds? What social events create change? And then how do people respond to that change? Okay, so this is going to be our first example of many that we see throughout the semester. Also, what are desirable leadership traits? And this is something we talked about over the last couple weeks with the absolute rulers. What makes a good leader? And then lastly, what makes authority legitimate? In other words, when does someone have a real claim to authority? Okay, so these are the three questions that we'd like you to consider as we move along today throughout this video. And if you remember, our last unit dealt with this idea of absolutism. And as a quick review, absolutism is when one person controls all the different aspects of society. They control the military, they control lawmaking, they control economic decisions, they pretty much control everything. And if you go against them, you get punished. Okay? Now that being said, there are even more problems than that with absolutism. First of all, people felt that the kings were out of touch with the people, that they didn't quite understand what it was like to be just a regular person. Okay, because they're living in these big palaces and they make all these really important decisions. So the people that lived under them felt like the kings really didn't understand them. Second, the people had little say in what rules and laws were imposed on them. Right? And if you think about it, that's really absolute rule. The one person says this is what's going on and you just have to accept it. And a lot of people felt that was unfair. The third major issue with absolutism was oppression. And basically when you oppress somebody, you put them down based on their beliefs. So for example, all of you know by now that I'm a Cardinals fan. And if I said, you know what, everyone who's a Cubs fan gets an F just because you're a Cubs fan, because you have a view different than mine, I would be oppressing you. Okay? In this case, if someone spoke out against a king or queen in any of these European countries, the people who spoke out would be punished or killed for having views different from that king. And then, of course, if you have that one person with all that power, it's just too much in the hands of one person. Basically, that person can do whatever they want. They can make any decision that they want, and it's whatever they want to do, whether it's the right decision or not. You really don't ask for input from everyone else. Okay, so absolutism, even though you have a strong ruler and sometimes who do great things, there are some major issues with that. Okay, and along with that last one, you really only have one point of view. One of the better things that people say about our current government is that if you don't agree, you can bring up another point of view and get someone to think more about what they think. Okay, but back in absolute rules, they don't have that. Okay, so now that we've established these issues with absolute rulers and shown you some examples, we're going to see an idea of how different people responded to these absolute rulers. And one who was in favor of what these people did was a guy named Thomas Hobbes. And he actually said that people need rulers like this because people are born evil. People are born naturally bad and naturally have a tendency to start chaos and anarchy like you see right there. And he said the only way we can prevent that is by having an absolute ruler, someone with all the power. And he said that the people's only right is the right to stay alive. That's your only right. Okay? And in order to protect that right, you need a strong ruler to prevent those naturally bad people from acting too selfishly. And he was big on this last point here. And he said that you need to sacrifice individual liberty for group safety. Okay, so basically you need to give up some of your personal freedoms to ensure that the entire group stays safe. Think about that today when we have the like searches at baseball games or football games, when you have to walk in and get searched to see if you have any weapons or illegal things. Okay, that's sacrificing your individual liberty of personal space to make sure that the entire group of people that within that stadium is safe. So this is Thomas Hobbes and what he believed in. So he was in favor of absolute rulers. Okay? Now, we're going to be looking at a period of time again called the Enlightenment. So following this period of absolute rule, including with Thomas Hobbes' ideas, we have a period of time in the 1700s where people begin to start explaining human nature through reason and the scientific method. Think back to the scientific revolution and how people started to question everything. This takes it a step further. And they believe in a really key term here, rationalism. The idea that truth can only be determined by logical thinking. You have to think through things in order to figure out what's really true. For example, if you look at this cartoon here on the left, you see the mathematician talking here. He's trying to solve a problem, but then right in the middle of it, he says, "Oh, a miracle occurs," and then I've got my answer. Okay, that's what people started to. That's how people explained the world back before the Enlightenment era. People said that's not really the best way to do it anymore. You have to really think about it. You have to think logically about the way the world is. Now, some people in the Enlightenment believed in religion, others didn't. And what this did is create a very important thing, especially for modern day America. It created the separation of church and state. This idea that the church has their own agenda, the state has their own agenda, or the government has their own agenda, and they're not supposed to mix with each other. Now, the four people we're going to see here in a second, it's a very key term, the philosophes. Okay, and yes, it is spelled right. The philosophes. They were philosophers, writers, and critics of society. And these guys would meet at a place called salons, not like a beauty salon like you think of, but more of a place where they would sit and discuss major ideas. And when they shared their ideas, they decided to write a quote-unquote handbook describing their different Enlightenment ideas. And they call that the encyclopedia. And again, it's not like the encyclopedia we see today with all the different like alphabetized things. This was simply a collection of all the different ideas of the philosophes. Okay, the first philosophe that we're going to talk about, and probably the most important and significant for American history, is a guy named John Locke. And he believed that people had three rights that could not be taken away. You have the right to life, you have the right to liberty, and you have the right to property. Okay, now hopefully, those of you who know a little bit about American history and the Constitution, this should sound pretty familiar. Okay? In the Declaration of Independence, Thomas Jefferson wrote life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. He took those ideas from John Locke, except he switched out property with the pursuit of happiness. And people debate why that is. Possibly he was trying to make it sound a little better, but he agreed with John Locke that we have three unalienable rights. And he said that rulers, their job is to protect these three rights. Now, unlike Thomas Hobbes, he said that individual rights are superior to the government and the laws. So what that means is that the government cannot make a law that takes away your individual rights, because your individual rights are more important than what the government says. Because again, their job is to protect your rights. And he said that any ruler who denies your basic rights should be known as a tyrant. And when we get to the American Revolution, this is a term that's thrown around a lot with King George in England, because they said he was denying their basic individual rights. And this is a really key part, which again leads to revolution. John Locke said that people are allowed to overthrow the ruler if the ruler denies their individual rights, which is a pretty crazy change if you think about it. Because again, the government is not doing their job, they're not protecting your rights, you as an individual can take them over. Okay, so that's John Locke, an Englishman who eventually influenced a lot of American ideas. The second, this kind of long, confusing looking word here, his name is Baron de Montesquieu. And Montesquieu, the big things we should know about him, is that he wrote a book called The Spirit of Laws, in which he described the perfect form of government. And he claimed that Great Britain had the best form of government because it had something called a separation of power, where instead of having one person with all the power, it was divided amongst a lot of different people, branches of the government, which again, if you know things about American history and American government, should be pretty familiar to you. Okay, we have different branches of the government. He also believed along with that there should be a system of checks and balances, that each of these different branches should keep the other one in check so that one does not become too powerful. So Montesquieu's idea relates to government, and again, as we see, directly influenced the United States. The third, this good-looking guy right here, is a French philosophe named Voltaire. Okay, and he was critical of intolerance and the suppression of freedoms. And basically what that means is that whenever someone's free speech was taken away or whenever they were punished for their views, Voltaire was not happy. And he wrote a book called The Candide, which ridiculed this idea of prejudice, bigotry, and oppressive government. He said all of these things are wrong. The government cannot do this. And a very, very important quote here from Voltaire. Because, again, he was such a supporter of religious freedom and free thought or free speech, he has this famous quote: "I may disapprove of what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it." Now think about that. What that means is, I don't necessarily have to agree with what you think. I'll go back to my Cubs example. I may not agree with the fact that you're a Cubs fan, but I respect your freedom to have that opinion. Okay, I'm not going to punish you for that, even though, as we all know, being a Cubs fan is a bad thing, right? Okay, but basically, you can believe what you want, and I won't be mad at you, even though I agree with something different. And then lastly, we have a guy named Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who believed in something called the social contract. And he said that people are good, but they are corrupted by their environment. So unlike Hobbes, who believed that people are born evil, Rousseau said that everyone is born good, but you're corrupted by your government. Okay? Now compare this to John Locke, who believed that people were born as a blank slate. Okay? This idea that you're born neither good nor evil, but it's simply based on how you're raised. So that's something to think about with you as well, is which one of these do you agree with? The fact that people are born evil, the fact that they're born good, or the fact that they're born a blank slate? And again, this is a debate that continues even today. He said that the only good government was one formed by the general will of society. He calls this popular sovereignty, a very key term here, that the only good government is created by what all the people want, or a majority of the people want. However, he's a little different because he believed that absolutism isn't necessarily a bad thing, but that person should be, quote-unquote, enlightened. Okay? So an absolute monarch technically could be in charge. That's okay, as long as the people liked it, that popular sovereignty idea. So if you have the support of most of the people and they like it, great. If he's looking out for the rights of the people, great. But if he's abusing his power, not great. Okay? So, as a review, we just looked at the Enlightenment. We talked about how it was a response to absolute rulers and the problems that we had with them. And we saw four major people, known as the philosophes, who talked about different ways of looking at government and rights in our society. Okay? So, as we're going to see eventually, this period of time of the Enlightenment leads to an even more violent period of revolution where people start to take these ideas and really fight back against absolute rulers. Okay, so thank you for listening, and have a great day.